Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks out there. Welcome to RPG with DBJ, and most especially, welcome to Third Pillar Thursday. Yes, Third Pillar Thursday, and I always have to say this preamble because sometimes there are references to pillars of thought or pillars of society, but in the role-playing community, the third pillar represents exploration. It is the third pillar of exploration in tabletop role-playing games, with the first and second pillars representing combat and social interactions, respectively. Now, this week, and something that we do here on this channel each and every week, is we take the concept of something. This week it's knights. We did a week of Medusas. We did a week of diseases. We've done chases and plants and giants and all that other good stuff. But on Third Pillar Thursday, and it happens to be one of my specialties, it's one of my favorites, I consider myself to be the self-appointed third pillar-ist of the tabletop RPG community. We take that subject and we wrap it around the environments that our players, that our setting takes place in. And normally what this involves in is using the third pillar of exploration. We talk about exploring unknown lands or delving deep into the sewers of a great and vast city. We discuss traveling through the empty regions of space and the void, or exploring dark dungeons, or traveling down dark alleys, or even running across the rooftops of a vast city-state. But sometimes we'll bring up a subject, and I specifically like bringing up very simple things and then extrapolating them out into a very complex nature. So today, because our subject is about knights, the mounted knights, the classic idea of arms and armor and taking oaths and serving a higher power and such. On the surface, I was thinking, well, I don't know how much this would fit into third pillarisms, right? Using the environment. Now, as a person who loves using the environment in tabletop games, not only do I love the idea of the extraordinary, floating islands and diving in the wormholes and but in those kinds of extraordinary things, but I love the mechanics of it as well. And for me, I feel like it has been an atrophied muscle that has gone underused in the tabletop RPG community. I sometimes talk about things like a green screen, right? And when it comes to movies and television, the actors themselves can be in dangerous and dynamic situations by standing in front of a green screen, and then whatever danger is happening gets projected onto the green screen. But we know that danger is not affecting our protagonist, right? Whether it's a volcano spewing out lava, or they're standing on top of a speeding train, or there's an earthquake, or they're in the Arctic regions and there's a blizzard. Sometimes it's like, well, yeah, I get it, but I don't get it, because they're just standing there. It's like there's nothing affecting them. So I'm a huge proponent of having the external elements affecting the PCs in all their ways. And of course, good morning, good afternoon, and of course, good evening for those on the other side of this great big blue ball that we hear. Thank you, Omen, and everyone, and the regulars here who love participating, which I'm always flabbergasted about. But when it comes to knights, right, normally I talk about things like, oh, well, we're going to talk about wormholes and how amazing that is, or we're going to talk about giants. And running around the furniture that giants would have in their havens and things, and PCs running around like the size of like house cats or mice or something like that. But when it comes to knights, I was like, well, what does this have to do with anything? And then I realized it's not really the knights themselves affecting the environment. It's just having an environment that's really cool for having knights in it. Okay, so follow me on this. When we think of the classic, the very stereotypical classic cinematic knight, we think of castles and moats and drawbridges. We think of tournaments and mounted combat and battlefields, and I think that's where the third pillar really gets to shine. Now, it's this is referred to in many different ways, but on by me on this channel, I sometimes refer to things as the triangle of the triangle of interaction. And for me, a triangle of interaction is basically you have your protagonists, your PCs, they've got their characters, you've got your enemies on the other side, and then every once in a while in our minds, sometimes there's this itch, and we're like, was there something missing here? I've got the dragon turtles, I've got the orc armies, I've got the clutch of giants, I've got the trolls, but there's something missing. And for me, to make to make something stable, to get that triangle really stable, is, well, what's going on in the background? What other mechanism is happening that may or may not draw the attention or turn the tides of the conflict that's going to happen between our antagonists and protagonists, right? And that might be an oncoming flood. That might be a winter storm or fog banks rolling in. It could be an earthquake or a thunderstorm, high winds or whatever. That's for a natural environment. But in a man-made environment, it can be anything from dark alleys to sewers to rooftops. Assassin's Creed, anyone? Right? It can be extreme height variations. Much like going back to the rooftop idea, not only do you have large gaps between the roofs, but you have places to fall. You have you may have catwalks and rope bridges and all those kind of things. You might be in a foundry or a clockwork tower fighting inside of the gears and mechanisms of a big giant clock or something like that. But when it comes to knights, and getting back to the idea of the knights, it's, why not have a place to let the knights play with all their really cool toys, right? I mean, if we're going to bother, if you say, you know what, let's just do something different. Let's have knights in mounted combat. Then I think it behooves us to have a place to have the mounted combat happen in the first place. Long rolling hills of green grass. Maybe those hills are more than just rolling. Maybe there's huge there are huge variations in heights, and so through the rolling hill, the PCs crest a hill and they look over and they see their enemy riding towards them on their own mounts, of course. Maybe orcs on the back of wargs, or come on, you got to come up with a number of mounted things other than just your classic horses, right? Elephants, camels, and various other types of arcane and bizarre and extraordinary, maybe land and or flying winged animals and such, right? Riding on the back of giant lizards and snakes and boars and buffalo or whatever. And maybe, just maybe, when the PCs, yep, ostriches, I remember the game, Joust. I love that game. Oh man. But yeah, you're absolutely right there, Tesla, right? Riding on the back of ostriches and flapping. Gotta press that button to get those wings flapping, or you'll drop to the bottom of I guess it was water or lava or something. I don't remember the game, but you get the point, right? If you're going to bother to do it, let's just go all in on this, right? So sure, maybe it might be a little bit more difficult to adjust. Like, well, if we're going to have mounted warriors on winged creatures, How do we adjust their space and speed and all that kind of business? Nah, it's an easy thing to get around, right? Just especially if you're doing theater of the mind. But even if you're going to do mounted combat, yeah, having an open plain, an open field in battle, okay, maybe that you're right. Maybe it is a little bit nondescript, okay? But we've seen, even in a nondescript location, that things can change dramatically, okay? So, first, let me talk about some of the natural environment, whether it is, uh, you know, let's say they're land based. Let's stick with that for a moment. Raging rivers, tall grasses, again with the thick fog. Maybe there are, it's a landscape of it's a broken landscape where it's dry and there's a number of plateaus. I suggest that you refer to many huge wide vistas of those in the Wild West movies, and you'll see them running across classic regions that are like in Utah, Montana, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, where it's like scrublands and dried lands, and every once in a while they'll come across like a raging river or a deep valley or thick woods or something like that. So throwing those kind of things in there, and then having some of those weather effects, whether it's blizzards, heat, snowstorms. Again, mounted combat doesn't need to be focused on the states, right? Your knights might be very Persian, Arabian, with riding on camels or giant scorpions or something, where there's nothing but sand dunes and sandstorms and dust devils and things kicking up, and that's natural environment. We got ourselves some natural environment. But then we have ourselves an unnatural environment. Now, an unnatural environment with mounted combat, come on now, we gotta have a war. We gotta have a battle. And there's nothing cooler than playing with the idea of having the fog of war happen in your game. Now, I got dinged when I tried to do this. One of the best renditions of a war actually happened on television, not necessarily in the movies. Although we've seen plenty of battles, medieval styled battles in movies. But it was the Battle of the Bastards for Game of Thrones, and how cool would it be for the characters to be mounted and they go in the battle, and sure, in the beginning there's like trumpeters and they're playing music and they're carrying banners and they look pristine and they're ready to charge in the battle, and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. And there's a way we can do this in tabletop games. I think one of the go-tos that I think is a bit of a mistake is to think of a battle, a vast battle, when you have dozens, hundreds, thousands of participants, as if each participant has its own numerical value. I think instead, if we think of a battlefield as being its own environment, despite the fact that there are individuals causing it, then I think the originality, the idea that there is something more dynamic in our environment. I think if we divorce ourselves of the participants and think about the not the cause but the effect, then I think we have a lot more originality and more things we can pull from. What I mean by this is, okay, let's say, for example, the classic, before the two sides clash together, you have the rain of arrows, right? We will fire so many arrows that we will blot out the sun. And then, of course, the Fassbender response is, then we will fight in the shade, right? And then you just look up in the sky, and of course they sound like wasps or bees or something, and then there's like that pregnant pause when you don't hear anything as they arch through the air, and then the arrows come landing around the protagonist and their army and stuff, and everyone's dodging for cover. It's not about the archers firing the arrows and how good they are. Screw that part. You don't need that part. What you want is the hazard. It's the effect of having this thing like falling from the sky, and then what happens to player characters? Do you allow them to make saving throws? Do they save for no damage, or is it a half damage thing? How wide of an area is it? Is there cover for them to take? Are you Do you allow your players to quote unquote take cover behind, say, their shields or their armor, or a fallen siege machine or something to prevent damage done to them? Do you think is this a dex based thing? Is it an athletics check to get to run to cover, to dodge underneath a turned over wagon, or pull a dead body over top of you to keep from being pierced by all the arrows or something? That's up to you. But the idea is that not only do you put the players in front of the danger, but make it dynamic enough to give them options as to basically give them enough rope to hang themselves with, right? Sure, you're going to have the one players like the barbarian or something that's like, I'm just going to charge across the battlefield. I don't care about the hail of arrows that are coming after me. There might be some other players that are like, I don't know if we're going to survive this. Like, are those a couple thousand arrows? Yeah, I'm going to hunker down under my shield. And reskinning and reflavoring the capabilities of the players. Like, you might consider hunkering down under a shield to be a dodge action, right? I'm avoiding harm. And you go, that's close enough to a dodge action. Sure, fine. Yeah. Maybe you give a player, since you don't want to take your attack action, you'll get an advantage to make these saving throws. You can always reskin and reflavor some of the rules. But that's just arrows, right? Yeah, Omen's like, arrows are more survivable than cannonballs. Yeah, we've seen heavier and more lethal things thrown through the air as well, whether it's like it's the classic cannonball that takes somebody's head out or blasts through somebody's chest, or bounces across a battlefield and rips somebody's limb off. Maybe there's other siege weapons. I think it was in the Lord of the Ring Return of the King that was it Gondor that was literally throwing chunks of like walls and battlements used with like not trebuchets, whatever, the catapults and whatnot. What's the other one that is gravity produced? Doesn't matter. Okay. Anyway, they're launching chunks of rock and wall at the goblinoid army that's down below them and stuff. I mean, those are the kind of things that are really cool. And again, if we remove from our minds the idea that a specific enemy is going after a specific PC, and make that part of the environment, that maybe they're having a sword fight with an enemy, the paladin is surrounded by 4, I don't know, armored orcs, or let's make them bigger. Let's make them ogres. They're armored ogres by the enemy that's come to the battlefield, and the paladin wants to take them out. And then they hear a horn blow, and overhead, out of the corner of their eye, they see nothing but like flaming, man-sized flaming balls of oil-soaked. I don't know. I'm thinking of a cat's toy, but you understand what I'm saying. Maybe it's like hay or wheat or whatever. It's fibers or something. And the paladin's like, okay, I could stand here and go after the ogres, but my ass don't want to burn to death. So what am I going to do? Do I disengage? Do I keep fighting? Do I go for cover? Do I stay here hoping that the ogres get attacked and smashed by these flaming fireballs like I am? Yeah, thank you, Dead Man. Yeah, the catapult rocks and the Dead Man's like, yeah, the trebuchet is gravity based. That's the one where you place the heavy item in it, and through leverage and gravity, it flings things. I know there's videos out there with trebuchets flinging like automobiles and whatnot. Although maybe in your post-apocalyptic game they are flinging automobiles. Maybe those automobiles are, I don't know, packed with gasoline or something. Who knows? Um, yeah, Tesla says the orcs were tossing broken pieces of Minas Tirith, Minas Tirith's wall back at them using trebuchets. Yes, yes, yes. See, and that's my point. Why the hell not? Yeah, pumpkin chunking, watermelons. Yep, pump. Yeah, pumpkin chunking. There's a whole professional league when it comes to tossing that stuff. Uh, you don't want to be on the receiving end of those things either. Not a pumpkin being blasted by like 5,000 psi across multiple miles or something like that. But again, having maybe this is a randomized thing. Maybe this is truly a battle where you get your D10 or your D20 table, and every round. And Omen's like, another good idea would be toilets. Hey, in a post-apocalyptic world, you gotta throw everything in there, including the kitchen sink, right? I don't know if those toilets will have been a lit toilet. Oh no! I like the toilets. Whoosh, fling. Yeah, you're like, can I get hit by a rock instead, please? But you get my point, right? Like, I mean, there's some things that were happening in battles that we've seen in a you guys know me. One of my other favorites is just movies and television and like graphic novels. I love the cinematic nature of those things, and I love bringing them into the gaming world. Why can't we do that? Every round on what is it? I default to using initiative 10 so that to differentiate it from, say, a creature's lair. Although you could very much take a creature's lair and just place that on the battlefield without the creature themselves, meaning that the environment itself is not under the control of some external force, but it is itself a danger. Meaning, there are things falling from the sky, whether they're explosives or flaming things or arrows or uh, catapult bolts or something. Maybe there are, and follow me down this rabbit hole, even other participants on the battlefield themselves could be their own dangers as environmental effects as opposed to them being specific antagonists. So, like I said with lairs are normally in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. A thing happens on initiative 20, and I default to initiative 10 because a lot of times these things can be mundane. But imagine every round that you use the game master or the PCs or whatever, or depending on where the PCs are on the battlefield. Yeah, pumpkin chunking. Pumpkin chunking record is 5,543 feet, or just over 1 mile. Jeez, yeah. And the hard part is that these machines that these guys make are so powerful they'll just explode the pumpkin. So you need a combination of like slow but powerful pressure. So it's not just one or the other. Yeah. What happens to the target? Waits to be seen. No, these are real competitions, and they have different categories based on air pressure, spring loaded, engines, things like that. Yeah. So, but so of course we have things falling from the sky, right? We have you can roll on your randomized table and go, okay, this thing is going to happen to you on this particular side of the battlefield. Now it's up to you, the PC, to decide what actions you're going to take, if any, to do a thing to protect yourself from the danger that may fall on you from above while you are engaged in possible battle with other people, right? Imagine the PC being grappled by an enemy, and the PC is kind of, is thinking like, you and I need to get the hell out of here. I know we're trying to kill each other, but we're both going to die if we get slammed by, I don't know, a flaming sphere or napalm or poisonous gases or chunks of building or whatever. But there's other things that happen on the battlefield too. Going back to the Battle of the Bastards, when Jon Snow is sitting there on the battlefield and he draws his sword and the cavalry runs in. Yeah, maybe the PCs might get trampled, or maybe they themselves are mounted and they do that classic movie and television thing where both armies come riding towards each other and they clash together in this chaos. Maybe there's a chance that you might get knocked over because another mounted rider mount goes out of control and kicks and rams into someone else. Maybe there are pikemen and their pikes are assembled together that might scare your mount and you may fall off of the mount's back. Maybe there are random people fighting and it just happens to be a mob of people that are just being pushed in one direction or another, crushing people together. All of these things happened in the Battle of the Bastards. Maybe just maybe a random attack like a thrown spear or a swung sword or a sling stone or something just happens to miss 5 other targets and happens to slide through your region of the battlefield. A random. Maybe all these things are just random in general. Dead Man's like talks about, the comment was, what happens on the receiving end of a pumpkin chunking competition? He's like, what happens to the target? See for yourself. And puts in a link in the Discord for YouTube. By the way, guys, this show is TriCast over 3 platforms. We have ourselves a Twitch channel and a YouTube channel, and we have ourselves a Discord channel as well. If you join the Discord, you can participate and listen in even with the audio in the boiler room. So yeah, absolutely. Now, and that's where all the links are set, because as you well know, you cannot put in links or links to other sites or even images except over on Discord. So YouTube and Twitch will prevent those things from taking place. Now, not only is it possible to have randomized effects, we also have ourselves some of those really classic battlefield things, right? Whether it's duels on the battlefield, you against the big enemy, and then you're surrounded by all kinds of things. I think you are allowed to Dead Man. I don't know if any of our participants are able to do it on Twitch. Oh shoot! I lost my window. I mean my chat windows. There we go. Jesus. Anyway, the idea. By the way, if those of you who are on Twitch and kind of like the show or want to be involved, or you're like, oh, it happens on Twitch. I like Twitch. Become a follower. If I become an affiliate, it allows me to allow you guys to have far more participation in the show, and it it unlocks some really cool things for those of you that want to participate. So, including maybe even having individuals that move up in the participation regime. You know what I mean? So anyway, guys, the idea of having a battlefield where you can really reskin and rename, reflavor some of those things, like siege weapons, take something like a dragon turtle and turn it into a steam-powered rolling machine with spikes on it, and maybe a battering ram or a spiked chain or something that's with a spiked ball on the end that's the size of a half the size of a horse or something that swings around. Maybe there are constructs like iron golems or stone golems or clay golems or something that are nothing but like constructs that are rolling or trudging across the battlefield. Maybe there's armies are moving different types of siege chicken. I don't know about a siege chicken. You could have a siege cow. Maybe like maybe a siege hen, siege deer. Although that I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you could play with that idea. I know you're being silly, but depending, since we have so many strange and siege cows, and since we have so many strange and awesome, extraordinary things in our tabletop games, I don't know. Why wouldn't non-human or why wouldn't other humanoid races use other different types of mechanisms to have battles with, right? Whether there are other mounted creatures or something, the goblinoid armor using wargs and dire wolves or what is it, goblin rats to run across the battlefields, complicating that. Maybe there are things being moved onto the battlefield that the players may or may not be able to stop by getting involved in it. Like, for example, tower shields, where you get a phalanx of people slamming their tower shields down to prevent you from like moving through a particular region, and you could just reskin or reflavor that as cover. Right? Maybe they're behind half cover, 3/4 cover, as they start moving things around the battlefield. Maybe a siege tower is using. Now you have yourself some height differences. Maybe the PCs are trying to scramble inside of a castle, and they have to scramble up a ladder to get over the castle wall, and the speed and the timing of going up the ladder before the people inside the castle use devices to push the ladders over before you fall, right? That might be a particular initiative number. Let's say if you have an initiative that's higher than 10, you can get above the ladder, but if it's 10 or below, yeah, they're going to use a pole and knock you down, right? Unless you're just fast enough. Be put in a picture of a siege cow. Why is the siege cow's head got to be so big? I don't mind the helmet and stuff, but come on now. And you can't see well, those are horns, so I guess you wouldn't want to milk a bull. But the other cows, maybe you could, dangle some bells down there in the lower nether regions. Although that is a cool picture, though. That is really cool. So, oh, since I remember that in the game Age of Wonders, halflings can throw chickens as a ranged attack, and don't mention height around dwarves. Now I know you guys listen, and I here's the competition between Tesla and Dead Man the Storyteller. Okay, here's the competition. What is the movie? It's a Bollywood movie where there is a major battle, and now there's a month. I know you guys are already thinking about it. There's a number of things that are happening in the battle, but one of them is that a bunch of soldiers get their shields. They bring their shields together to turn into a ball. They pull some trees down. The trees are used as makeshift catapults. They get flung over the castle walls, and when the iron ball slams on, or brass ball probably, or something like that, or bronze or whatever, when it slams on the ground, in slow motion it breaks open, and it's the group of guys there with their arms and their weapons and stuff, and then they get into a battle and stuff. I know you guys know what the name of that movie is, or at least get a get a link. Yeah, Jay. Yep, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the one where they start running up the they were running up the trees. They ran up the trees, and the trees fling them, and then they come together. Bahubali 2, thank you. Wow, Jay. There you go, sweet. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, and there's some, listen, that wasn't the most ridiculous thing, but come on. that was cool. You got to give it to him. As ridiculous as it was, it's like, yeah. And you tell your player something like, you see a big iron ball fly through the air, and then it slams on the ground, and in slow motion it shatters open, and there are six armed warriors inside of it, and the PCs are like, what? Huh? Um, what's the other one? A launched two giant ballista arrows were fired with a large tapestry. I don't know, football field sized tapestry was launched through the air, and then it was lit on fire as it was flying through the air to ignite and burn the army that it landed on top of. There's a bunch of other things, but anyway, but you get my point. You could do some really, I mean, this is tabletop role playing games, right? We can do some really strange and odd things. And sure, maybe we don't want to throw chickens through the air, but we sure can throw, I don't know, buckets of snakes, or we can throw elementals trapped in bottles or something. I mean, heck, you could have a battlefield. Let's go for like a World War I effect, trench warfare, but turning the volume up to 11. Not that you need to, but maybe there's something like the equivalent of barbed wire. Maybe what's the druidic spell with the thorns and things like that. Maybe there's something equivalent to barbed wire. Maybe there are arcane casters on the other side of the battlefield using magic missile. Magic missiles all automatically hits. Maybe they're firing those across the battlefield. And that's why it's so dangerous to go. Thorn whips. Yep, maybe there's thorn whips all over the place. Or glyphs. Glyphs could operate the exact same way as what is it? Landmines, right? So maybe glyphs are in the ground, set by the enemy, and the PCs are going across the battlefield, and they end up stepping on like something stone or metallic or whatever, and they look down and they see an arcane rune carved into a piece of like tin or whatever, and they're like, my foot is on a glyph, and everyone's like, don't move, we have to bring in someone to disarm it. And they bring in a caster, and it's like, okay, hold on, let me just place a small rock on top of the glyph, or whatever. I don't know how you disarm a glyph. I mean, I don't know what parallel you could do with like a landmine and a glyph or whatever, but it sure would be fun to do it. And imagine a glyph doesn't have to explode. It could teleport you, polymorph you, paralyze you, put you in a frozen stasis from being frozen, or maybe a bolt of lightning shoots out of the ground and blasts you from the feet first or something. I mean, any number of things. Maybe a bolt of flame shoots up, or maybe you roll a d10 and figure out what the heck happens to you, right? Or who knows? Maybe there are like these glyphs teleport enemies to you, right? The minute you step on it, all of a sudden, 1d6 fiends are summoned from the netherworlds, and they appear on the battlefield, and you're like, don't step on the glyphs, watch out. Step on one, boom, 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 and all of a sudden they appear. Yeah, Deadman says D&D has had glyphs since 2nd edition. They were dismantled or disarmed by thieves originally. They did have that ability, didn't they? That's why they were given the ability to read scrolls and read magic originally, because they were magical traps. And if the thief, today of course they're known as a rogue, but the thief was the trap disarmer. How do they disarm arcane traps? Well, they learned how to read magic, and then therefore, having the ability to read magic, they can also now synergistically move over to disarming arcane traps. And there's no reason why you can't have arcane traps on the battlefield, either stationary or moving. And of course, we can also have a ton of other obstacles that happen to move and shift on the battlefield, right? Whether it's a siege tower and siege machines, dead bodies can be height factors. They can be used as cover. They could be used as a mode of stealth by hiding in in amongst the dead. Maybe they, of course, become difficult terrain. You guys know how much my pet peeve about difficult terrain is. It is one vector in a world where our tabletop role playing is nothing but imagination and like chaos and originality. It's like that's all you gave us was difficult terrain. Come on, you know. But we do have other things. Who's to say that some spell-like effect can't be used on the battlefield, right? What's the equivalent of a smoke grenade? Okay, maybe it's a fog cloud, right? Maybe that fog cloud is created because of one of those flaming spheres that were launched from the battlements of that castle you're trying to siege, and it lit the siege tower on fire, and now that siege tower is on fire and it starts to crumble and it falls over or whatnot. It's still in the battlefield. We often don't think about or don't include in our games the aftermath of something happening, right? I cast Fireball. Great. Now the fireball does other things. It catches things on fire. That fire creates smoke. That smoke is a choking hazard, is a visual hazard. I shoot my lightning bolt. Okay, that lightning bolt, whether it hits or misses, or that acid arrow or whatever hits or misses, it still has an effect on the battlefield. Why not literally, in the context of what we're talking about, have a literal effect on the battlefield? Heck, you could have going to World War One. Trenches can be filled with things like, oh, I don't know, water, acid, oozes. Don't let a natural thunderstorm happen and get stuck down in a trench and have it start to fill with water and mud and climbing difficulties to go up and down muddy trenches and things like that. Maybe there are so many other things. Okay, so we're trying to siege this castle. Of course, we have a castle to siege. How do we get across a moat? How do we get the drawbridge down, if there is a classic drawbridge? I'm being very stereotypical here, right? How do we scale the walls, if and or when there is a possibility to do so? What happens if there's a battle in and around a siege tower itself? Maybe the PCs are inside the siege tower and have to fight their way up through the different levels of the siege tower because the enemy has crossed into the siege tower to come down the siege tower. Or maybe they see a bunch of flaming arrowed archers about to light the siege tower on fire, and they have to move fast enough up through the siege tower to get across into the castle, over the castle wall before they're lit on fire. There you go. Thank you very much, Tesla, for the YouTube link. Thank you very much in the Discord for that movie. Bahubali 2. Sorry, I butchered the name, but the movie is, at least the clips I've seen are excellent. I've never seen the whole thing, and I really want to. It came out in 2017. Cool. I'm sure there's a way to find it. I'm sure it's on some streaming platform somewhere. So, but anyway, of course we have our battle to, there is the idea of one or more of the player characters maybe individually sneaking over a castle wall to get the drawbridge to come down, or to undo the locks on the doors of a castle. We've all seen what that looks like, whether there's like a crank or there's the big giant wooden beams that fall into the big iron L holders. I don't know what they're called. And the big PC gets over the wall and lifts it up, or maybe a number of PCs work together to lift up the portcullis gates or whatever. I mean, those are all really cool battlefield elements that, why wouldn't we put them in the game? Why not make them skill challenges? Why not make them traps? I've told this story plenty of times where maybe, and I was a teenager at the time, where I had not thought of this originally, but I was like, oh, I'm going to have a castle. I'm going to have harpies on the outside of the castle. The PCs were low level. I was like, they can't fight the harpies. They'll just run from them. And instead they were like, we're going to lead the PCs in between the two portcullis gates and trap the harpies inside both of the portcullises and light them on fire while they're trapped inside. And I was just like, wait, what? And I hadn't even considered what the castle really looked like because I had already designed the dungeon down below. This was just an excuse to get them down underground. But I was like, that's a really good idea. And now they didn't really ask permission in the sense of like, is there one portcullis gate or two gates? I just went along with it, and that's really kind of how the rule of cool works. So maybe it's a little bit of a side note, a little tangent of what the rule of cool is. But that's essentially what happened, and they lit them on fire and blah blah blah. So maybe how do you adjudicate that in your game? Yeah, there's an engine for it. Deadman says Netflix has it and the original along with the third one. Oh, sweet. Thank you very much there, Deadman. So at least Netflix here in the States has it. Every once in a while, you'll get different regions that of the same streaming service that have different material on it based on region rights. So I'm hoping that it is elsewhere. So I will check it out. Bahubali 2. Cool. I'm sure someone's put together a playlist of all the greatest action elements of the action scenes in those movies. Somebody has had to have done that and put that on YouTube somewhere. But anyway, also, so we've got our siege. Maybe there's a moat. Maybe there's creatures in the moat. Maybe the PCs have to swim across the moat. Of course, you have the added problem of PCs in armor doing all these somewhat acrobatic and crazy things and the limitations set thereof. For example, I think it's pretty reasonable to say, okay, listen, armor that gives you disadvantage on stealth probably gives you disadvantage on, say, an athletics check to swim, or you use the encumbrance rules, or something of that nature. Maybe it even gives you disadvantage to dodge some of those really wild ranged attacks that might be launching over those walls in the first place. But now that you've gotten into the castle, of course, again, we don't just have vertical, but we have horizontal hazards as well, fighting on catwalks and things, and maybe falling off of those catwalks, having battles up and down steps and ladders. We also have towers. We have individuals maybe hiding behind murder holes and other things inside of the castle. So there might be further hazards being launched at the PCs. And again, it's the Hydra hazard. Not the Hydra, the creature, but the Hydra hazard as a tool to use in our tool belt as a game master, right? The Hydra hazard is attacking the heads knowing that the body is still alive, or attacking the body knowing that the heads are still a danger, right? And it's putting those options in the player's hands and letting the PCs make the decision, okay, I'm going to attack the body, or essentially, I'm going to attack the main thrust of the danger, knowing that I'm ignoring the harm that can come at me from being in this region, or I attack the individual elements of the region, knowing that the main body of this thing is still around. For example, PCs are in the main courtyard of the castle, and there are crossbowmen up on catwalks ducked behind battlements, right? Launching into the main courtyard. Okay, do you run across the courtyard knowing to get into the main part of the building, knowing that the multiples of dozens of crossbowmen are launching at perceiving you as the enemy? Or do you scramble up onto the catwalks, the battlements, to attack the crossbowmen to reduce the danger maybe of your allies who are now trying to run across the courtyard, right? And of course, you have with height, you also have space. So you can't just make one melee attack against 57 crossbowmen, especially when they are all scattered around the upper regions of a courtyard, then maybe it's, I wouldn't say split the party, but of course you might have to split your attention to do such a thing. And mind you, I'm busy talking about like the more cinematic medieval battles, but since we have magic and psionics and aliens and otherworldly creatures, there's no reason why those things wouldn't be there as well. Especially if you have, say, a castle held shut by a wall of force, or a wall of fire appears in front of you, or a wall of ice or something, and it requires someone to dispel it, to get around it, or it becomes another hazard that you have to go around. The third pillar of interaction in a game is not just creating difficulties and hazards and obstacles for your player, even though that's essentially what I'm talking about, but it's also about the player characters being able to use and abuse the environment for their own needs, right? Like I said, when I was a teenager, my players decided to use two portcullis gates to trap in an enemy, and there are no rules for that. But technically there are, because 99.9% of all role-playing games have an engine, and that engine is the die mechanic. Usually that die mechanic defaults to being able to use skills, being able to use attributes, and being able to come up with some kind of difficulty. And that 4-part or 1+3 engine mechanic is in damn near every role-playing game. So you don't even have to table flip. You can go make an athletics check, make a persuasion check, make an acrobatics or athletics, sleight of hand, medicine checks. Those are skills. You can do straight up saving throws, right? Whatever mechanism you have in your game, whether it's a reflex or will save, whether it's a constitution save or an intelligence check or something like that, perception checks, investigation, start using some of those other skills that we tend to laud as being useless. Maybe they aren't really that useless at all. Maybe it's not a perception check. Maybe perception lets you notice things. Investigation lets you know what it is that you noticed in the first place, right? Perception lets you hear something. Investigation lets you know what that sound is. And I'm not saying that's a truism. I'm saying you could make that differentiation. Survival lets you survive now. Maybe nature lets you predict what could happen in the future. I don't know. I don't like the fact that there's those two similar skills, but that's just a minor note, right? Maybe a medicine check lets you know how enemies were killed or how allies were killed, like a forensics kind of thing, So also there is the idea of reskinning and reflavoring things. Like I said, there are creatures that you can reskin as environmental effects. There are spells you can reskin as environmental effects. As a matter of fact, you could even default to magic is nothing more than spontaneously creating things that are already existent in the world. A fog bank is nothing but and a fog cloud spell is nothing but a wizard or a druid or whatever the case might be of summoning fog that naturally exists in the environment. Maybe that's a normalism, right? So using the environment and then not just having the environment in the game, but having it as a dynamic element to force the players to make tough decisions for themselves and others. If a battle is happening, the PCs are facing off against their enemy, and it's like a duel on the battlefield, and a lot of the soldiers on both sides are surrounding them, and the PCs there's 3 to 5 of them, and they're standing up against the siege of the giants or something. And then everyone knows that the dark clouds, all of a sudden there's a thunderstorm and lightning strikes and high winds, and then there's rain coming down, and the ground starts to get muddy and everything, while the PCs are mud and blood drenched and whatnot, and there's piles of dead bodies everywhere. And why not have that have an effect on the battlefield and let the PCs use and abuse the elements around them to their benefit, whether it is from the movie 300. They knock over a stack of bodies so large it's like a defensive wall. Why not let the players hide amongst dead bodies and use that as a place for stealth so they can, slit someone's throat as an enemy goes by. Maybe, since we're talking about knights and armor and things like that, maybe the PC is able to use a pile of dead. Let's go away from dead bodies. Let's go with a knocked over siege engine, right? Like a catapult or something was knocked over, and they're hiding behind it as cover as the giant tries to pin them down with the giant has a giant club, or I don't know, 18-foot brass scimitar or something, and is looking at the PC as they're scrambling around, scrambling around the fallen siege machine or what have you. Maybe there are maybe there's even who knows, like unsprung traps on the battlefield, going back to landmines and things, or barbed wire, or the arcane equivalent on the battlefield that the PC is trying to draw the enemy into. Maybe there's a way to distract the enemy, knowing that flaming arrows are flying through the air, and the PC waits in front of the enemy long enough for the enemy not to notice that they too are going to be hit by a chunk of wall flung by a trebuchet when the PC jumps for it, Now, one of the dangers that I can hear some of you out there thinking is, if I let the PCs get away with getting advantage because they are leaping off a castle wall, or they're using, I don't know, the flaming dead dwarven siege machine, and getting behind that and using that as like a fog cloud cover, or jumping into the machine and using its steam powered breath or something, because I reskinned the dragon turtle, but I left it on the battlefield because it's half dead or something, and I just said it was disabled, it couldn't roll, and the PC jumps into the hatch and starts to use it to blast some of the enemies. That the fear of it as a dungeon master or game master is, if I do this once, they'll do this all the time. And sure, you could claim that's a fear, like, oh, my PC gets a free advantage every time I jump off of something high. I'm going to jump off of high things anyway, right? Over and over again, And sure, someone could try to spam the hell out of the idea that you're giving them an advantage, both uppercase and lowercase a. But my response to that is, why are you including the same elements every single time they are engaging in your world, right? The environment is something that should shift and change and mutate and become temporary, using improvised weapons, right? Sure, you can pick up the table and use it as I'll let you improvise it as a two-handed weapon. You could do D10 with it or something, I don't care. But if you slam someone over the head with it, it'll shatter, right? It's the idea that it's all random and temporary, and unless you're only running games where only the PCs are only sieging castles that are all exactly the same and using the same tactics, I wouldn't worry about it. If one game they're sieging a castle, another game they are on a sailing ship in a storm, in another game they're delving down into an ancient crypt, in yet another game they're running across rooftops, then it's always different. It should always be different. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for allowing me to rant and rave about one of my favorite subjects, and what I feel is a subject that is often underutilized. And so I just wanted to bring my 2 cents to the table and just be an advocate for just taking a deep breath. Take a deep breath in, whoosha, and letting it out, and just going, you know what? Yeah, maybe I will include this element. Maybe I will include this static element into my world, or this randomizer, or this escalation of danger into my background of my world, maybe I will allow the players to use and abuse the environment for their own benefit, at least in this sense, to allow them to succeed. Sometimes, like I said, if success is only measured by damage and how much damage you do, then the only people that are going to feel success are the ones that do that, who basically cause the most damage. But damage and effectiveness are two separate things. Again, a character might have to take 2 hits to kill an ogre, but if a character can knock that ogre off of a castle wall into a moat filled with giant crocodiles, then the more effective character is the one that did the slip, trip, and fall on the ogre in 1 attack rather than the character who's doing a ton of damage with 2 attacks, right? So guys, anyway, thank you very much. By the way, like, share, follow, subscribe, whatever, to support the channel if you like long form content. And by the way, all the information for this channel and the very brilliant people who are here all the time, who participate, that information is found below, and they too here make me look brilliant. So thank you very much, guys. And anyway, have a great one. I will see you tomorrow on Future Friday. Guys, have a great one. See ya. Bye. Thank you for watching.